Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2023, week 24. That's June 12th to June 18th. And we are kicking off this video by doing something we do in the shop super frequently, and that is doing some cleanup. So as I'm sweeping up the floor, I actually find a screw, and I get super excited about this. I am pumped because I think this is this missing screw for my idle air motor. I've been missing this for a bit, and I thought I found it, but as it turns out, it's the wrong pitch, it's the wrong head size, it's not the right screw. As it turns out, that's a screw that I dropped for the through panel firewall connector that I have in the engine bay. When I pulled that out, I just dropped that screw, so that's what that is for, not the screw that I thought I had lost a long time ago. That one is still MIA. Now that we've got a little bit of cleaning done, we can get the engine hoist out of there. So there's a few things that I need to do before I put the engine back in the car. So I'm going to get it off the stand because I need it off the stand. The stand bolts to the back of the engine, and I need access to the back of the engine so I can put the scatter shield on, I can put the flywheel on, I can put the clutch on. So I need the engine off of the stand and just onto the ground. So I grab those boards so that I could just drop the engine right on the floor. Yeah, while this isn't typically a woodworking channel, unfortunately the boards that I have are far too long. They will not work as they are, so I need to cut them down. So I'm just going to use the tailgate of my truck, clamp it to the tailgate, and, cut these down. I think I cut them down to like 16 inches, and it doesn't need to be anything fancy. It doesn't need to be exact. I just need it shorter. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to measure the difference between the back sump and the front sump, and I think it's like 1.5 inches. So what I will need is one board in the front, one board in the back under the rear sump there, and then 2 boards under the front sump, and that should make this pretty level. So I need 3 boards cut total. So I put the leveler on in a previous video, so I'm just going to roll the engine over, get it hooked up, and then I'm going to undo all the bolts, lift the engine off of the stand, and get this onto the floor. I'm just gonna go and grab some 7/16 nuts. That way I just throw some nuts on the end. That way I don't lose the bolts for the engine lift, or the engine stand I should say. And yeah, I can just throw the boards down and gently lower this down. I don't want to slam it down. You know, it's already sketchy enough putting it on its oil pan, but if you do it, you know, gently, it's not going to hurt anything. And with the engine safely on the ground, we do not need the engine hoist anymore, so we can just store that away for the moment. So unfortunately, I don't have the flywheel that I'm going to be using on this engine. So I'm just grabbing a different flywheel that I already have. I can put this one in and do all of my checks until I get the actual flywheel in. That's not a problem. And I am also going to grab down the clutch. The reason why I grabbed the clutch down is when I first got this clutch and I opened it all up, I thought that they sent me flywheel bolts with it. As it turns out, they did not. Those are clutch bolts for a different application, not this one. So at this point in time, I am dead in the water because I do not have flywheel bolts. The company I bought the clutch and that flywheel through sold me flywheel bolts. However, my fault, I did not check the invoice before. I didn't thoroughly check the invoice to fully read it. I just saw flywheel and said, okay, good. They sent me bolts for a flathead Ford, which apparently is just 4 bolts, not the 6 bolts that I need. So yep, dead in the water. But here we are, the next day or another day. I've got flywheel bolts now from a local machine shop. And now what I can do is I can kind of put this back together. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the engine leveler off because I do not need it on for the checks that I'm going to be doing. I'm just going to pull the starter off of the scatter shield because I don't need that on right now, and that would prevent me from installing a flywheel. So the way this works is I put this big gold backing plate on first, and then the flywheel goes on next. I bolt the flywheel on, and then I can bolt the scatter shield on after that. So as it turns out, I'm missing one of the 7/16 bolts for the scatter shield. Don't know where it went. I'm sure it ended up in the bin, but whatever, it's just a washer. So I don't know why I'm dry fitting the scatter shield. I already know it fits. I already had it on in the car and attached to the tranny. I think I probably just had a brain fart and forgot that I have to put the flywheel on first. So as always with the hardware, I'm just going to throw a little bit of mineral spirits in a bucket, toss the hardware in there, and clean off all of the shipping like lubricant. And I'm going to clean it all off, dry it all off. And then there are some instructions behind the little grease packet. So I'm just going to, I don't remember if I found the instructions or if I just read them online, whatever the case is, but I'm going to read the instructions and follow them in order to get these installed on the car. So these are a 3/4 inch 12-point sockets, and I'm not actually using any of the lubricant right now. The reason being, as I mentioned before, this is not the flywheel that is going to be mated up to this engine, so I'm not going to use any of the lubricant. I'm just going to torque it up so that it's all squared up, and when I actually get the flywheel in for this engine, I'll pull this back off and put the other one on, and I'll follow all the proper procedures for it. Here I am just throwing a socket and breaker bar on the crank bolt so that way I can torque these down. I believe these get torqued up to 70 foot-pounds. I want to say it's 70 foot-pounds. I could be wrong. Follow the instructions as always. I just went back and read the instructions that I showed, and it says 85 foot-pounds. So those are torqued up to 85 foot-pounds. And now what I can do is I can put the scatter shield on and torque it down so that it's all evenly torqued. With the scatter shield installed, I can start the process for indexing the bell housing. So, long story short, the general process is you take a dial indicator caliper, you run it around the inside edge of the bell housing, and through a process, I'm not going to explain it all. Holly has a great video on indexing. Go watch it if you're wondering how to do this. But long story short is you're going to rotate that dial indicator around in the inside bore of the scatter shield. You're going to find the highest point, mark it off, and then you're going to take measurements from there. Now, unfortunately, this bell housing has a lot of cutouts in it. So you can see there's a little tiny cut at the top. We're about to approach another massive cutout in the flywheel where, in theory, the cable or the hydraulic lines are supposed to go. And then at the bottom, there's two more. So with all of these holes and cuts, it really makes it so that this is almost impossible to measure out properly and accurately. So the solution is Holly actually makes a T56 scatter shield indexing plate for just this situation, and I end up buying it because this just is not working for me. So I very quickly abandoned this process instead of trying to fight my way through it. Yep, I realized just how pointless this is, so I grab some acetone, I wipe off all the marks, and I just abandon this for now. Since I'm kind of dead in the water with that, I am just going to do some cleanup. So this is my coolant drain pan, but since it's the biggest pan I had when I was doing all the engine stuff, I just used it and I got a bunch of oil in there. So I really want to get all the oil cleaned off, because if I dump coolant in here, I don't like, if I put good clean coolant in here, I don't want it contaminated with oil and then have to dump it. So I'm going to do a real good job cleaning this out. Alright, so what do you do when there's nothing else to do? That's right, you get back to doing some wiring. So we're just going to clean up a little bit and we are going to get back on wiring. Alright, so what specifically are we working on? We are going to get onto the fuel pump, fuel sender, and the main battery disconnect switch. So I already have the hole drilled out in the floor, but I need to put a grommet in there to protect the wires. So what I'm going to do is from the bottom, I'm going to, well, what I'm doing right now is I'm just reaming out the hole, or deburring the hole. So that's a deburring tool just to get rid of any sharp, jagged edges from the cutting. But then what I'm going to do is, because it's so tight up top, I'm actually going to drill all the holes for the grommet from the bottom, but then I will install it from the top once all the holes are drilled. If I recall correctly, this was a 1/8 inch drill bit that I used for drilling the holes for mounting the grommet to the car, and then I'm going to use 1/8 inch rivets. So I'm just kind of going through my rivet collection to make sure that I get the correct size, the correct grip, etc., etc. So this right here is a brand new pneumatic air rivet gun that I got. Man, that thing makes life so much easier. I really, really like it, and I'm so sad I didn't get it sooner. So I'm just grabbing a center punch, my face shield, hammer, all those good things so that I can start drilling this from the bottom. Now that I have the holes drilled up from the bottom, I'm just going to take my die grinder and this little scuff pad and just kind of clean up the holes from the top, because when you drill through a piece of metal, usually you'll get a little piece of metal that protrudes on, you know, the bottom side or whatever side you were drilling towards. So with that done, I can now start putting that grommet on. But at this point in time, I have misplaced the grommet. I have no idea where it is, so I'm looking for it. I'm searching the bench, the back of the car, the box, everywhere I was, and I just cannot find it. So if you pay real close attention, it was actually in my toolbox. I put it down when I grabbed the rivet gun. But at this point in time, I still have not found it myself. I've still lost it. So I actually end up grabbing one of my other new ones and just using it because I know I'll eventually find it. Like, I'm still looking for it on the ground. I'm still looking for it on the bench. But yeah, so I eventually just give up, and there's one of my new ones sitting on the bench, and I just use it because I don't have time to look for it forever. But yeah, it is in my toolbox, on my blue toolbox on the left side of the car, and I put it down while I was grabbing all the rivets. Just need to quickly change attachments on the rivet gun. I am measuring the thickness of the 4-gauge wire because I need to put a hole in the middle of that grommet so that all the wires can go through it. And I want this tight around the wires. I don't want it loose and sloppy. I do know that I'm also going to be putting some loom around this eventually, but I still want a tight fit. Alright, now that we got a hole in the grommet, it's pretty much the perfect size, we are going to go ahead and install this in the car. So, as it turns out, when I drilled this out, it really didn't drill the holes all that straight, so I'm not going to put all of the rivets in right now because they don't all fit. And what I'm going to do is, I know I'm going to be doing a whole ton of body and paint on this car, so that means everything's getting pulled out. So what I will end up doing is drilling out this grommet later, and I will weld up the holes and re-drill all the holes for the grommets at that time when I'm doing all the body and paint. Yeah, this rivet gun just makes this so easy. Just put it down, press the button, and it pulls it out clean. It's so much nicer than the hand riveter. I am so happy I got that. With that done, we can shove all the wires down that need to go down. So that's the fuel pump power, that is the fuel sender, ground and signal, as well as the battery contactor, power switch. Positive wire. It's the wire that goes from the battery to the switch and then to the contactors to give them power. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going to my original wire harness, because this has all of the connectors for the back of the car. So all of the lights at the back, the reverse lights, the tail lights, the turn signal, the stop lights, those are all those connectors. All of those bulb connectors or harnesses or sockets, the sockets, that's what they're called, are all on this harness. So I'm just going to kind of get them all situated and then cut them out of that harness, so that because I just need the sockets. I don't need that entire harness, because that entire car harness is going away. So yeah, just chopped it off, and now since all the bulbs are broken, just from throwing the harness around, it's hit the ground, all the bulbs are broken, so I got to use a pair of needle nose just to get them out of the sockets. So if you've watched any of my other videos or any of my other wiring up to this point, you'll know I really do not like splicing connections. So what I want to do is I want to pull the connectors out of this sockets, and I want to see what kind of connector it is and see if I can find new connectors, so that way I don't have to splice. So as you can see, I'm just struggling to get this ground pin out, and I eventually just say fuck it, and I just yeet the goddamn thing out of there. I just pull it out. I think I broke the tab off. I didn't care. I got it out so I can see what the connector is. At the end of the day, I did not want to reuse those connectors or those sockets because of how old they are. At this point, I already knew that. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going to get some of the stuff out of the interior of the car. That way I can start working on the inside of the car. Obviously, I got some more wiring to do on the inside, so I'm starting to make some room, make it so I can get under the car. Yeah. So after I cleaned up the middle underside of the car, I decided, no, I'm not going to start a new project until I finish what I started at the back. So I'm getting back onto the fuel pump wiring and all the wiring in the back first. So I'm just going to run these wires, terminate them, put a Deutsch connector on for the fuel pump. You've seen me do this stuff a whole pile. But yeah, so this is all the wiring for the back. I got battery disconnect, I got the fuel gauge sender wires, and then the fuel pump wires. And of course the big 4-gauge wire coming through the grommet is the ground from the battery to the chassis, but you saw me put that on a while ago. That's nothing new, I just got to put it back on. So I put this rubber piece in between the hatch and the fuel cell a while ago. I never got around to cutting a hole, so I'm just going to very loosely cut a hole. I will trim it down later to make it nice and square, but for now I just needed access for the fuel gauge wiring. All right, with those wires routed, it is time to clean up the bench a little bit because there's just a pile of stuff on here, papers and everything else from all the work I've been doing. So let's just get it cleaned up. And with that, our fuel gauge is hooked up. In theory, if I put power to all the gauges, the fuel gauge should work if there's fuel in there. Alright, so now we're going to get into some O2 sensor wiring and some transmission wiring. And in order to do that, I need to put some grommets in the firewall, or in the transmission tunnel. So there's going to be a grommet on either side. The driver's side is going to have the driver's side O2 sensor. It's going to have the 3 sensors for the transmission. That's the VSS, the backup lights, and the speed sensor. So we're going to start off on the driver's side, and I'm going to grab the well, I'm not going to grab the grommet yet. I am going to move this bundle of wires a little bit. I want it a little bit higher up on the trans tunnel, and then the grommet's going to go underneath it. So I'm just going to do a little bit of movement, a little bit of reworking, and then we're going to get into some of that wiring. Alright, so that right there is the O2 sensor, and I want that to end up being underneath the car. So the reason why I want it underneath the car and not under the carpet is if I ever need to change the O2 sensor, I want to be able to access the connector. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the grommet really close to, or as far back in that trans tunnel as I can, so that way I can get the connector down into the trans tunnel. And I've already checked, and I have more than enough lead on the O2 sensor to get to where that connector is, so I don't need to worry about that. I do want the grommet flush on the trans tunnel, so I'm just using a scraper and pulling off all of that old sound deadening material. And that's where I want the grommet to go on this side as well as the other side. There's space on the other side for the passenger side grommet, so we're going to put it in the same place. Center punch it so I know exactly where to drill out. Be careful not to nick any of the wires with the hole saw, because that would be a terrible thing. I would have to undo that bundle, run more wires, and God, that would suck. So just be very careful not to go through that. Yeah, so you've already seen me install grommets, so I'm going to do this on this side. Punch out the middle of it for the wires, drill the holes for the rivets, put a couple of rivets in, and then I'm going to push the wires through into the through into the trans tunnel. Now that we have that grommet in, we're going to do a tiny little bit of cleanup. The inside of the car is a mess, especially after drilling that hole. There's a ton of just garbage on the, floor of the car. So we'll put a few tools away, or at least throw them on the cart there, and then we'll clean up the inside of the car here a little bit before we continue. Alright, so now that we got things a little bit cleaner, we can actually start look at running the wires down into the tranny tunnel. So as I mentioned before, I got like a VSS, reverse light power, as well as the solenoid for the reverse lockout on the shifter. What I'm doing right now is I'm just grabbing down the O2 sensor, and the reason why I'm doing that is I need to make note of what wires go where. I'm gonna end up cutting these connectors off, and I'm gonna replace them with Deutsch connectors because I've got Deutsch connectors on everything else in the car. But as you can see, I've got the connector plugged in, and I'm taking pictures of it so that I know exactly where everything goes. And when I replace the connector, all the wires connect back into the correct spots. It'd be really bad if you mixed them up. It wouldn't work so well. So I was able to get all of the pins out of the actual O2 sensor, but I wasn't able to depin the harness coming from the Holly, and so I just said, fuck it, I'm just going to cut these. I don't care anyways, it doesn't matter. So just cut them, get them out of there. We can strip them and put on the Deutsch ends, and away we go. So I looked it up, and the O2 sensor will take a max of like 7 amps, and that's like the very, very max rating that it'll take. And most of them that I read up about were like 1.2 to 2 amps, something like that. I couldn't find the NGK specification, but that's all right. So I'm just using a Deutsch DTM connector, and that should be fine for this application. So now that I have finished crimping these, I'm going to put them through the grommet. I'm not putting an end on it for 2 reasons. One, I would need to put the end on underneath the car. And second, I don't have any DTM8s, which is what I need for this. So I'll have to order some, get some in, and then once they come in, I'll be able to just throw them on the ends under the car. But while we're waiting, I can certainly go ahead and throw all of the sockets onto the O2 sensor, so it is also ready to go as soon as we get those connectors in. Alright, so now that the connector is done for the pins are done for the O2 sensor, we can go ahead and we can grab the connectors for the transmission connections. And they use 3 separate types of ends on these transmissions. I'm assuming it's so that people can buy like a pre-made harness and not screw it up where to plug it in. But yeah, so it's 3 different types, so I had to figure out what type it was and buy all the different plugs. But whatever, I got them, so we're gonna get get under the car and run the wires and start getting these all connected up. So I'm just going to grab the connectors and I'm going to do a real quick check just to make sure all the connectors fit where I think they're going to fit before I actually plug them in. Because if I run into an issue, I don't want to have stuff terminated and then it doesn't fit. So yeah, so that one right there is the reverse solenoid lockout. Reverse lockout solenoid connector. So that one works just fine. I know that the front one's a weather pack. I've seen those, 1,000 times. And this is supposed to be the vehicle speed sensor, but that connector does not fit. As it turns out, and I didn't realize this, there are like two different T56 speed sensors. There's a GM style, which is what I bought the connector for, and then there's the Ford style, which is what I have. And so I'm just looking up right now to see different T56 connectors and to realize that there's a completely different connector that I didn't even know about, and I bought the wrong one. Yay. Yeah, so this is a little bit of the process of when I'm looking at parts. I am on the computer, I'm researching stuff, I'm trying to find the connector. And in this case, you can kind of see it's a connector and it's got a little pigtail, and that pigtail is, 6 to 8 inches long. Well, if you've seen anything that I do, I don't want pigtails. I just want the plain connector, and I will terminate the wires myself. So I ended up getting one with a pigtail, and just to see if I can figure out which terminals it needs. And I have figured out which terminals it needs, but they are not cheap from the distributor that I can get them from. So I'm actually reaching out to the company that I bought the connector from to see if they can get me terminals. But yeah, so that's just something that you run into. You run into something, it doesn't work. You go and you do a little bit of research, and you understand the problem, and then you, fix it and you move on. So one thing is my reverse lockout solenoid will need a ground. So I'm just confirming the bolt size on this transmission, which I believe it's 3/8. And I'm just confirming that so that I can put the correct end on the ground wire for the reverse lockout solenoid. So yeah, when all's said and done, the ground, I'm just going to ground it to the transmission. The transmission is going to bolt to the engine. The engine is going to have a ground, so I'm totally fine doing it this way. There's also going to be the engine plate connecting to the chassis, so there should be enough of a ground for this one circuit. Yeah. Now that we have the things wired in the transmission that we can until we get that connector and the terminals, I'm going to install the passenger side grommet, and we are going to do the pins for the connector on this one. So right here you can kind of see that the oxygen sensor wire on the passenger side is super long. Holley gives you a super long connector, so that way you can run it wherever you need. What I'm doing is I am just twinning it up to the one on the driver's side. I do my best to make things the same from passenger to driver, or whatever the case may be. So I cut them to the same length. I'm cutting them back to the same amount, and I'm even going to put the exact same amount of heat shrink on it as the other one, just so it looks almost identical. With this last pin going on, that is all that we have for this connector, and with that we are going to just push that through, and then we are going to start doing some cleanup. All right, and with this cleanup coming to a conclusion, that is all the time we have for today. So as always, if you stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll see you in the next one.